Hi, I'm Father Michael Orsi. I'm your host for Action for Life Television, that good news program which brings you the big G for the gospel of Jesus Christ, and the little g, all the good things that people do to put that gospel of life into action. Hey gang, you know, today we have kind of an intellectual program for you because I know that you are a very intellectually gifted audience. And so we're going to be dealing with some of the fine points of the law, especially regarding the First Amendment, freedom of religion. So what we have done is we have gotten a real pro for this program. His name is John Bursch, and he is an attorney, and he works for the Alliance Defending Freedom, which is very interested in challenging any attempts to destroy marriage, the family, and also any attempts to destroy human life. So he is pro-life, and so is the Alliance Defending Freedom. So, Mr. John Bursch, welcome to our program today. Thank you so much for being with us.
Delighted to be here.
Well, can you tell us about the Alliance Defending Freedom? What is this organization? How did it get started, and what does it do?
Sure. Alliance Defending Freedom was put together just short of 30 years ago by a variety of faith leaders from different denominations. And the intention was to create a Christian ACLU, something that would preserve the rights of people to be able to practice their faith in the public square and speak freely about religion. Today, Alliance Defending Freedom is the largest public law firm in the world that defends religious liberty, free speech, the right to life, marriage and family, and parental rights. And we have attorneys all over this country and in many other countries as well. The threats to religious liberty and free speech come in many varieties, and certainly more severe and pervasive today than at any time in our country's history. We've spent a lot of time in the U.S. Supreme Court. I'm sure many of your viewers know us from the Dobbs case that overturned Roe versus Wade last year. That was an ADF case.
How about that, folks? Right here. Here we are. We have somebody that worked on that Dobbs case, which overturned the nefarious Roe v. Wade. So, as you can see, we only have the creme de la creme on our show. Okay, tell us some more about the good news that you are helping to combat the evil one. And that's what this is about, folks. This is about the evil ones trying to destroy our society, trying to destroy human life, trying to destroy the nuclear family. Anything goes these days with family. Parental rights, could you imagine that, folks? Parental rights, like the state, like taking over our kids, like it takes a family. I mean, you know, they're not just your kids, they're our kids, a la Uncle Joe in D.C. Go ahead, I'm sorry. What else do you do? Tell us, what else do you do, John?
Well, I was going to mention one other recent U.S. Supreme Court decision just from June at the end of the term on the very last day. It was called 303 Creative, and you and your listeners or viewers may have heard about it. It involves a website and graphic designer. Her name is Lori Smith, and she started her company 303 Creative because she wanted to be able to praise God in the work that she was doing. And one of the things specifically that she wanted to do was to celebrate God's plan for marriage between one man and one woman. Unfortunately, Lori lives in Colorado, which is the same state where Jack Phillips, the baker, Masterpiece Cake Shop, lives. And so she was going to be subjected to the same law that he was, that would punish her if she wanted to celebrate God's plan for marriage, but declined to celebrate same-sex weddings. And so we went all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court and won one of the biggest free speech cases in this century, which held that the government cannot compel you to speak, even if you're a business, in ways that violate your religious conscience.
So
and
this
that's
was decided,
going to be a huge benefit to many people.
This was decided on free speech, not freedom of religion.
Right.
Okay.
Right, exactly. That was decided on free speech grounds.
Okay, could you tell us, sometimes the folks get a little bit mixed up with free speech and freedom of religion. Could you tell us the difference?
Sure. Generally speaking, and there's some overlap between the two, free speech is when we're talking about words, when the government censors you from being able to talk about something when you want to, or if it compels you to say something that you don't want to. So Lori Smith was a good example of both of those things. She could not express her religious beliefs about marriage, and if she tried to do that, she would be compelled to speak the government's message. When we're talking about free exercise, more often it has to do with conduct. So, for example, the Fulton case from a few years ago involved the city of Philadelphia and Catholic Social Services in Philadelphia. And Catholic Social Services or Catholic Charities said we can only place kids in foster homes, something that they've been doing for many, many years, in accordance with the teachings of the church. In other words, they could only place kids with a mother and a father in a married household. And the city of Philadelphia objected to that, and the U.S. Supreme Court ultimately upheld the religious freedom of Catholic Charities in Philadelphia and said that under the contracts and the laws that Philadelphia had, they weren't allowed to do that. So generally speaking, free speech addresses the words, talking, messages, and free exercise addresses the conduct, things that I'm involved in or forced participation in something.
Okay. There is a situation now in Massachusetts, and a little boy, 12 years old, went to school wearing a shirt that said there were only two genders. And the school told him he had to go home. And then the school board said that he couldn't wear the shirt. And then it went to the circuit court, and they said that they were backing up the school board. I mean, could you tell us what's going on there and give us a prognostication?
Yeah, that's another Alliance Defending Freedom case. And it actually gets even worse than that, because after the boy was sent home from school for wearing the shirt that said there are only two genders, he went back to school wearing the same shirt, but he took some tape and he blotted out two genders and put censored. So it was purely a free speech T-shirt. And the school told him that he couldn't wear that to school either. And what's really pernicious about this particular school and the policy it had with respect to this young man's shirt is that the school will freely allow kids to promote gender ideology in the school. So to the extent that anyone wants to celebrate the fact that there are hundreds of genders and that boys can be girls and girls can be boys, or neither or both at the same time, they're free to wear those T-shirts and to have celebrations. The school even has pride festivals and things like that. But they shut down his message that said that there are only two genders. And so that's a particular kind of speech censorship. It's called viewpoint censorship. And that means that the government has chosen a specific topic, and on that topic, it has picked a side. And it will allow anyone who wants to speak on one side, but it'll prohibit anybody who speaks on the other side. Now, just as a matter of school and academics, no school should be doing that. If we're going to be pursuing truth, everybody has to be able to speak equally on any topic, no matter how sensitive or controversial it might be. But leaving that aside, the government, as a matter of free speech law, cannot pick and choose winners and losers in the marketplace of ideas. So we're appealing that case to the Federal Court of Appeals, that's over Massachusetts, the First Circuit. And we're hopeful that if not there, then at least in the U.S. Supreme Court, that the students and his parents' free speech rights will be protected and recognized.
Okay, I remember a case called the Tinker case, and it had to do with schools, and it was back in 1965. And some students were showing up at school protesting the Vietnam War and wearing black armbands. When it went to the Supreme Court said that the students had a right to express themselves even when they went into the school. So do you think this is kind of the same deal that's going to happen? Supreme Court, if it goes to the Supreme? I think
it's very similar.
Okay.
And the objections that the school makes are very similar to the objections that were made in the Tinker case. In that case, the school said if you wear black armbands, that will disrupt the school environment, the educational environment. That all of a sudden classes will deteriorate where everybody's only focused on the protests and on debates about the war, and they won't be able to do their reading and writing and arithmetic. And here, too, the school has said that the T-shirt that the young man was wearing, 12 years old, that said there are only two genders, would be disruptive to the school environment, that it would cause some people to feel bad, and that's the reason that they can squelch his speech. And like in Tinker, I don't think that excuse is going to fly as this case moves up the court system.
But couldn't LGBTQ T-shirts upset some of the students, too? I mean, what's good for the goose is good for the gander, folks. That's plain English.
Absolutely. And that's why this viewpoint specific censorship is what's so pernicious. When the school allows one side of the debate to speak freely and then shuts down the other side of the debate, that's when the courts are most likely to jump in and protect First Amendment rights. And
yeah.
one thing I'll mention, there's been kind of a dramatic shift over the last 5 years or so in the types of free speech and free exercise cases that we're seeing, as well as parental rights, which is kind of a new area for us, where this gender ideology is really driving the cases that are going through the courts. Before 5 years ago, there were free speech and free exercise cases involving marriage issues. But those have pretty much gone by the wayside, and they've all been replaced by gender ideology. So whether it's the T-shirts in school, whether it's requiring public school teachers or college professors to use preferred pronouns, whether it is secretly transitioning kids at school and doing it behind the backs of the parents and lying to them about it, whether it's taking kids away in places like California if the parents won't affirm and transition a child, these speech and free exercise conflicts come up in the marketplace, as they did for Lori Smith with the marriage issue. And so I actually wrote a book about this, which Sophia Institute Press is releasing next week on August 15th. It's called Loving God's Children, the Church and Gender Ideology. And it's kind of a soup to nuts handbook for parents and others who want to understand the church's theological underpinnings for their teachings about the human person, about human sexuality, and why we reject gender ideology. It's also about the science behind gender ideology. It explains that there is no such thing as a boy born in a girl's body, and it really takes on some of these myths about suicide and transition and things like that. It also talks about the way that culture, whether it be television, movies, the government, the media, are pushing a gender ideology agenda that can be harmful to your kids, and then answers a lot of common questions that parents and others might have, so that every Catholic in the pew, when they're talking to their kids, when they're talking to other family members, even talking to coworkers or neighbors, friends, they'll be able to articulate clearly and winsomely why the Catholic Church's position on these gender ideology issues is the one that is loving, and that the other side's position is not. And so I'd encourage folks to take a look at that. It's available at all the major booksellers, but we're especially asking those folks to go to the Sophia Institute website and look for Loving God's Children.
Okay, Loving God's Children. Hey, folks, I mean, you got to keep up on this stuff because the attacks are coming. They're fast and furious upon people who have a biblical point of view. Let me even take that back. It's not just a biblical point of view. It is a common sense point of view that says, wait a minute, this is not reality. We can recognize right from wrong. There is a natural law. A boy is a boy, a girl is a girl. Marriage is between a man and a woman. And yet we're being attacked over and over and over again, trying to change reality and trying to, let me put it this way, disorganize or undermine the brains of our children. And this is a devastating thing because it disrespects not only God, but it disrespects God's children. Okay, now, John, I want to ask you some other questions regarding some attacks recently on I shouldn't say recently, they've been going on for a long time, the institution of marriage. Okay, we know, folks, marriage is between a man and a woman. And yet now society says, like, hey, anything goes. And, it's already, enshrined in law that, you could have 2 men and you could have 2 women and like, that's okay. And, states recognize that, and there's reciprocity between the states. And folks, I mean, it looks like, where do we go from here? I want to ask you, where do we go from here?
Well, I think we need to approach it in the same way that we approach the issue of abortion after Roe versus Wade. And Father, I'm sure you remember back in 1973, when the U.S. Supreme Court decided Roe, that there was an immediate response from the Catholic Church and lay Catholics through a number of apostolates that immediately tried to change the culture's heart and mind about the issue of abortion. So, for example, the March for Life immediately sprung up. We have groups like 40 Days for Life. We have Live Action. We have all kinds of groups that are educating the public about the meaning of life beginning at conception and supporting the church's teaching. And many priests, many bishops in different dioceses will regularly attend annual Right to Life dinners, and they'll have speakers to educate about this. And sometimes we'll even hear about it from the pulpit. But in the aftermath of the Obergefell decision in 2015, when the Supreme Court made up a right to same-sex marriage, and I say made up because, like abortion, the U.S. Constitution says nothing about marriage. It's completely silent. And when the Constitution is silent about an issue, then that issue is left to the states acting through their democratic processes to decide what the rule is. And many states had chosen the rule to define marriage between one man and one woman, as it has been for millennia in every culture that's ever existed in humankind. But when that decision came out, there was no March for Marriage. There was no 40 days for marriage. There was no live action for marriage. Instead, it was pretty much met with silence. And so even in the Catholic churches, we rarely hear about the definition of marriage from the pulpit during a homily, and we don't see programming coming into our parish halls. And until we can change the cultural mindset on the meaning and importance of marriage, and I'll talk about what some of those things might look like, it's going to be difficult to impossible to get the U.S. Supreme Court to do anything about it. Because although the court applies the Constitution, it also responds in some sense to popular will. So for example, there was another same-sex marriage case brought out of the Minnesota Supreme Court 30 years before Obergefell, and the court unanimously turned down that case for lack of jurisdiction, which meant they didn't think that the federal courts had any role to play in defining marriage. But what had happened in those 30 years is that culture had dramatically changed to support same-sex marriage. And so when the issue came back, 5 justices out of 9 agreed to go along with the popular will. Same thing with abortion. I don't think that Dobbs would have been possible had it not been for all the efforts of church leaders and lay Catholics and their apostolates to change the cultural message and feeling about abortion. And until we can get that same kind of effort behind marriage, it's going to be very difficult to get the Supreme Court to do anything about that.
Hi, BC Cloutier here. We've got some exciting news for you. On October 19th, at the Naples Grand Beach Resort, Action for Life presents Jim Caviezel live and in person.
Why are you doing it? Because God's children are not for sale.
The star of Sound of Freedom will be here in Naples, telling us all about the filming of the movie and the real-life experiences of Special Agent Tim Ballard.
Hear that? That's the sound of freedom.
Please join us for a lovely evening with dinner and beverages at the Naples Grand Beach Resort on Thursday, October 19th, beginning at 5:30 p.m. Get tickets at actionforlife.org/events.
So you're telling us, I just want to be clear, folks, I'm asking, John, what can be done? How do we go against this tidal wave of same-sex marriage where, a lot of young people today, they see nothing wrong with it. And then you even hear some clergy saying, well, it's all about love. Well, all right. Are you telling me that it's the fault of the churches?
Well, the church just needs to do a better job getting its message out. So to start with that concept of love, which is something that I address in this book on gender ideology because it applies equally to that social battle. People think of love as something sweet and sentimental. It's a feeling that we express towards others. But as you know, the Catechism of the Catholic Church very clearly teaches that love is willing the best for another person, willing what's best for them. And every parent understands this intuitively with their children. If you had a child who really, really wanted to touch a hot stove, they wanted it more than anything, more than a new car or toy car or a bike, you still wouldn't let them do it because you know the truth about that stove. It will hurt them. It'll burn them if they touch it. And so we need to start thinking about marriage and gender ideology in those terms. What's best for human flourishing to make each person the best that they can possibly be? And the next thing that we need to do is understand theology of the body. And again, there's a lot of overlap on that between marriage and gender ideology. This is chapter 2 in the book. And as you know, John Paul II wrote and spoke beautifully about this issue and how God intentionally created humans, male and female, so that the original design, one man and one woman, would come together in a sacramental marriage and be a total gift to each other, to love each other, in other words, to will the best for the other person without any reservations. And when they gave that gift, even the gift of their reproductive capacity, that love was so strong that it would require a new name for the independent person that was created, a son or a daughter. And as theology of the body explains, and Christopher West has talked about this, that's an icon for the Trinity itself. When we destroy marriage, we're taking away the same icon for the Trinity, because God the Father and Jesus the Son also love each other unconditionally. And from that love proceeds a third person, 3 in 1, the Holy Spirit. And so we're destroying the entire nature that God created when we walk away from his marriage plan. And it's a disaster for kids. Just like we thought that no-fault divorce would be good for kids because their parents wouldn't be fighting anymore. And what has resulted is kids who are being raised by one parent in homes that are full of conflict. When we break up marriage, we deprive children of their right to know their biological mother and father, because of course, no 2 men and 2 women can come together and create their own children. They have to do it through surrogacy or some other method. And you have extreme cases, obviously, where both parents are gone or not fit to take care of a child, and we have adoption in those situations. But the baseline rule that the church has always taught is that every child has a right to know their biological mother and father.
I want to tell you something,
the design, folks. And we lose the kids.
John is talking about some really, really important issues here. And I asked him, I said, is it the fault of the churches that, we're not defending the, marriage between a man and a woman, or the nuclear family, man, husband, wife, children, that's the basic building block of society. I'll ask you something. Think about this. When you go to church on Sunday, does the pastor or the priest or the rabbi ever talk about this? I'm just wondering, and if they don't, you might ask them why not. And if they're well, I'm not sure, it could be okay, it might be okay, or I'm afraid, go to a different church. All right. you gotta tell the truth, folks. You gotta tell the truth. All right. Now, John, I want to ask you another question. I want to get this in before we end the program. The biggest threat to parental rights. We see a lot of this going on in education today. Parents are saying, hey, it's my right to know what my child is doing in school, what he's learning in school. I want to know if he's deciding to be something else than the way God made him. Tell us about what you're working on regarding parental rights.
Well, the biggest cultural threat is this notion that somehow parents relinquish the right to continue educating their children when they send them off to school, whether that be a public or a private school. The biggest legal threat is the schools taking that cultural mandate and running with it at the expense of parents. And so we have a number of lawsuits right now dealing especially with gender ideology, but also critical race theory and some other things, where the kids are just teaching, or the teachers are teaching the kids abominable things. So for example, in California, they have a curriculum set up that begins with kindergarten. We're talking about 5 and 6-year-old kids and goes right through elementary school, where they ask the kids to think about how they feel. Do they feel more like a boy or more like a girl, or neither or both? And then they give that a label and they ask them to profess their gender identity. And they're teaching this to our youngest children. And in many school districts, we have probably half a dozen lawsuits on this subject. They have policies where if the child comes to a counselor or a teacher and expresses some gender confusion, that the teacher is supposed to affirm their gender identity as opposed to their biological sex and keep it secret from the parents, even to the point where they'll use the child's preferred pronouns at school, but use their sex-based pronouns when talking with the parent, so the parent doesn't know anything about it. They're putting a wedge between parents and their kids. And what we know from the science, again, this is also in the book, Loving God's Children, is that kids who are legitimately struggling with gender dysphoria, this is some kind of a disconnect or a dissonance between their mind and their body. So we're not talking about social contagion gender identity, that happens too, but true gender dysphoria, that 80 to 95% of them will naturally align their mind with their body if they're just left on their own and they're not affirmed. But if their teachers and their friends start using the preferred pronouns and encouraging them to dress like the opposite sex and give them permission to go on the opposite sex's athletic team and to use the showers and locker rooms, there's almost a 100% chance that they will then go on to have gender dysphoria throughout their life. And for those kids who go through the whole treatment, into adulthood, where they have the puberty blockers and they have the cross-sex hormones, and ultimately they have the surgery, it doesn't change whether they're male or female. Every cell in their body still is coated with chromosomes that tell every scientist who wants to look or wants to know whether they're a male or a female. But if they go through all of that, the issues involving attempted suicide, a successful suicide, and mental health problems actually increase. So if we're loving our kids, first of all, we're not jumping on the gender ideology bandwagon. We're encouraging them to align their mind with their bodies, just like we would for anorexia or any other disorder.
And you're handling cases like this out in California, around the nation?
Around the nation, we've got the issues with the schools that have these types of curriculum, with schools that are hiding transitions from their parents. We're fighting laws that are closely related to this, although outside the schools. They're counseling censorship laws, where if a child and a parent want to go to a counselor, say a Catholic counselor, to address a gender dysphoria issue and try to align the child's mind with the body, in 20 states and 100 jurisdictions total around the United States, the counselor can lose their license for giving that type of counseling.
Holy cow. Hey, folks, do you see how serious this matter is? And, you know, we need an organization like Alliance Defending Freedom, and they're fighting the battle for all of us. So I hope that you'll support this great organization. I want to thank John Bursch for being with us today. John's for action, I'm for action, and I know you are too. We would like to thank our generous sponsors for their wonderful support. Thanks for watching. Please join us next time for Action for Life. I'm for action, and I hope you are too. I'm Father Michael Orsi. I am your host for Action for Life Television, that good news program which talks about the gospel of Jesus Christ, the big G, and the little g, all the good things that people are doing to put the gospel of life into action. So please join us for the next episode of Action for Life.
Hi, BC Cloutier here. We've got some exciting news for you. On October 19th, at the Naples Grand Beach Resort, Action for Life presents Jim Caviezel live and in person.
Why are you doing it? Because God's children are not for sale.
The star of Sound of Freedom will be here in Naples, telling us all about the filming of the movie and the real-life experiences of Special Agent Tim Ballard.
Hear that? That's the sound of freedom.
Please join us for a lovely evening with dinner and beverages at the Naples Grand Beach Resort on Thursday, October 19th, beginning at 5:30 p.m. Get tickets at actionforlife.org/events.